Hey guys! Alright, so natural lighting for once. I'm recording at a decent hour. First of all, I want to say thank you to all my patrons who've been supporting me. I love you guys so much. I appreciate all the effort, and I know that financially supporting a Patreon can always seem like, you know, is a thing. Like, you're giving me financial support, and I appreciate it, and I totally understand those who can't, and those who do, I definitely appreciate it so much. And so thank you to all of you. On the Patreon, there's also an exclusive Patreon only podcast that I've been working on. So there should be 2 episodes on the Patreon by the time this video comes up. So that's an exciting thing for anyone over there, and you can get it at any tier. And I have a few little things that I'm gonna slowly put out there once they are more solidified. Like, I'm working on getting stickers and stuff like that for you guys on the Patreon. So thank you for the support. We're almost at 50 patrons, and I'm so excited about that. That is so as you can tell by the title of this video, I wanted to come back and talk about the Marvel versus DC bias issue, because when I did my Birds of Prey review, which was very hyperbolic and fun, and I hope you guys enjoyed it, I had a fun time recording it. It was interesting because I was doing so many things and I was like, is any of this working? I don't know. And I enjoyed making it, and you guys seem to enjoy watching it, so thank you. Even if you didn't like the movie, I appreciate the views. And one of the things I brought up in the video is that I have much deeper attachment to a lot of the DC characters in comparison to the Marvel characters, where I have a much nicher love of particular characters, particular franchises, and therefore I don't have the same emotional investment in certain characters on the basis of what I bring to it as a comic book fan. A few people were like bringing this up in a way that I kind of wanted to address, not address them, but address the issue of the Marvel versus DC bias, because this is something that comes up all the time online. It is constantly like in the ether about, is there sort of a bias against DC because Marvel is doing so well, like wherever the bridges shall meet. And honestly, as a bisexual, I just feel like, you know, I like both for the most part, but I have my preference, you know. DC is women and Marvel is men to me, you know. They're a particular set of men, but a lot of DC. But the thing that I find interesting is the way in which we are not really allowed or give ourselves the space to admit that we have these preferences, and that just because we have those preferences doesn't mean that we turn off our brain when we're trying to critically watch or examine these shows and programs. One person was like, just because I like Superman, I'm not gonna watch a shitty Superman movie. And it's like, I love Superman, which is why I don't like Man of Steel. I don't think it's a good movie. I don't think it's a good Superman movie. I have a lot of issues with it, but I own it, and I have a lot of these movies because they have sentimental value for me, because they are characters that I like. I buy DC Universe with my own coin, even though all I watch on it is Titans and go back and watch old Superman the animated series episodes, because Superman the animated series is like my jam. It's underrated, especially in comparison to the other ones, but I think it's amazing and you should watch it. I watch Titans. I watch it every week. I keep up with it regularly. I like cover it a lot for work, but I honestly really almost compulsively keep watching the show, even though I do not think it's well written, and I get frustrated at almost every other episode. There are some episodes of Titans that are like amazing and brilliant and thoughtful, and I'm like, yes, more of this, and then instantly the next episode is like some garbage. And it's like, why do I keep coming back? Because I love the Titans, because that's a brand, a franchise that I have loved for years, since I was a kid, since I watched Teen Titans. I remember waking up early in the morning to watch Teen Titans. I will always be attached to this particular roster of characters. Therefore, I'll see what they're in, and I will, you know, I'll have a lot more emotional investment in them getting it right, or meeting a version of those characters that I am attached to. So yeah, that's my bias that I bring into it, that I will watch Titans for as long as it's probably gonna air, unless it does something egregious like kill off Starfire, which if they did that, electric chair. Electric chair. But I've never watched an episode of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Like, I think I watched the first season of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., or the first 13, wasn't really into it, and I was like, there's no one I'm looking forward to seeing on this show. There are no characters that I like really want to check out that make me stick with this program. And I know it's a better show, and I know it's really good. And I love like Ming-Na Wen, like that's my queen. I love her, but that franchise was not something that I particularly cared about. Like with the Disney Plus Marvel shows coming out, I will be watching The Falcon and the Winter Soldier because I really like Captain America and I love Isaiah Bradley potentially being on the show, and I am attached to those characters and those actors. Probably won't watch WandaVision because don't care about them. I'll watch Loki because I like Tom Hiddleston and I enjoy Loki through what I've seen about the MCU. And that's it. But if the DC universe had the equivalent of like having like an exclusive DC show about like Superman or Stargirl or some shit, I would watch it, and I do. That's why I watch all the Arrowverse. Part of the reason why, even though they frustrate me, I watch a lot of the Arrowverse shows is because I really love those characters. Like I watch Supergirl compulsively because I really love Supergirl. I always have. I think that character is really fun and refreshing, and I think Melissa Benoist is just fantastic in it. I have my issues with it concerning how they write and wrote Jimmy, but like other than that, I love that show. I love Black Lightning. It is probably the second best Arrowverse show. I watch The Flash because I'm attached to those characters. Literally the only reason why I stopped watching Arrow was because they killed Laurel and Dinah is my favorite character, and period, I was done. Like I don't care about the Green Arrow by himself. Like I don't watch Legends of Tomorrow simply because I don't like Sarah Lance, so I can watch. I didn't really like the dynamic that they wrote between Sarah and Laurel in any of those early Arrow seasons, so when like Sarah went to go get her own show, I was like, good, and she can just stay there. I've watched Smallville because, and I ended up getting into Smallville later in life, but like I watched that for all those seasons even though they were messy at times because I love those characters. I watched the Birds of Prey TV show, and I honestly still kind of enjoy the Birds of Prey TV show because again, I really liked what they were trying to do with a lot of these characters, and I think that is part of the genuine joy of being a fan of these products. And I think here's what I think is the issue sometimes is that we forget that a lot of us are fans and critics. I'm a fan of these characters, but I can also critically see if the movies are good or not. I think it's also very important to understand that like the MCU has a very particular place in our pop culture world that is a little bit more so than just being a fan of comics, because I think that what Marvel has managed to do is make its characters like so popular and so a part of the pop culture you have to see it zeitgeist. It doesn't matter if you like these characters, you like comics or not, but you feel obligated to watch it because it's a part of the zeitgeist, it's part of conversation, so you have to do it. And that is a good and bad thing. I think it's great that a lot of these characters are getting to be seen and acknowledged. I've learned a lot about these characters through the MCU. Like, I wasn't really a Thor fan before I started watching the Thor movies, and even though I don't think those movies are amazing besides Ragnarok, like, I ended up reading more Loki comics. I ended up looking more about Thor, and I'm like, oh, these things are interesting. I'll look at that. Like, it exposes you to these characters, and like, with me, I saw Iron Man. Iron Man came out when I was like 16 years old. I saw it because I had a crush on Robert Downey Jr. I didn't watch Iron Man because I cared about that character in the comics. I saw Iron Man because A, I liked Robert Downey Jr. I thought he was really handsome and I just liked him. And also my sister, who is a really hardcore comic book fan as well, was telling me all these things about what made the movie so important. That they had they built a real suit. How Robert Downey Jr.'s past really made him the perfect choice to play a character like Tony Stark, who is an alcoholic and dealing with all kind of things, like Ira Demon in a bottle because of that. And so the MCU was always really good, and remains that for the most part, of attaching the right person to the right role and making it work together. And that's super important to understand too, is that like a lot of the feelings and attachment I have to like Captain America is a lot because of how I like Chris Evans and how I appreciate the energy. Like, I feel like, to me, Chris Evans is like the Christopher Reeve of that character. Like, he is so good at embodying all of the altruistic elements that Steve is supposed to have. However, there are also very deep inconsistencies in the MCU narrative because of the amount of hands that were traded off in creating these characters, and how the characters are not all consistently done well. I think if you were a Thor fan before you came into this franchise, I can't imagine that the series has been really kind to him, because what I find is that every time there's an ensemble movie, Thor is the worst written character. He is the most denigrated. His stuff is always getting the most tossed over. He barely gets lines and stuff like that, like in almost every crossover movie. And what's super interesting in retrospect, because when I go back and I watch the first Avengers movie, because when I saw the first Avengers movie 3 times. I saw it, like, they were showing it at a screening at my school. I saw it every single night, and I had paid, so I saw it 4 times, and I had paid to see it in theaters. I was obsessed with this movie. I thought it was amazing. You know, Tom Hiddleston could, like, get my pussy, you know. It was like, that was my jam. When I watched it again recently, I was like, wow, everyone sounds the same. And it was in retrospect of having had, like, those 2 phases, and then the ending phases, and being like, it's interesting how Chris Rogers, how Steve Rogers is written one way in these movies, one way in these movies, and then one way in these movies. Which version of this character do I actually like, or am I just liking the connective tissue of Chris Evans? Because who he is in Age of Ultron and Avengers, it's like, I don't know him, but who he is in Winter Soldier, it's like, I know him. You know, like, these are the things that you kind of realize when you step back from the hype and excitement of having seen these movies as a fan, of having enjoyed these movies uncritically. And also, I did not start becoming like a professional like movie critic because I work at the Mary Sue and I have a Rotten Tomatoes account, you know. That happened much later. Like, I only started working there about 2 years ago, so I wasn't reviewing any of these movies or going into these movies as someone who was there to like take notes and vigorously critique them in that way. Same thing with DC. My response to them was very visceral in both ways. And so the Marvel movies, when I would go into them and not really know the storylines from my own background, like I'm not as familiar with the Winter Soldier storylines with Captain America. I'm not. I wasn't really interested in them growing up. I like that character, but I really didn't know that storyline that well. So I never came into it with like a pre-existing idea of what it should be. So I was able to just really enjoy it for what it was. And it was also well made. And I think Winter Soldier is probably one of the like my top 3 ever MCU movies. It's amazing. And because of that, I was able to like just enjoy it for what it is. I didn't have to bring in any extra stuff into it. But when I watch a movie like Man of Steel, and I'm coming into it as someone who like really loves Superman. I remember my brother had seen the movie before I did, and he came to me and he was like, "You're not gonna like this movie, and there's gonna be one scene in the movie that makes you like completely turn on it." And I'm watching the movie and I'm like, it's fine, it's doing its thing, it's not perfect, but it's whatever. But when Papa Kent allows himself to be set over in a tornado and tells his son not to help him, I was like, nope. Like, I hard note, because that was just not Pa to me. Like, that wasn't Pa Kent, because I had an image of Pa Kent that had been formed from years of reading the comics, of watching the other movies, of watching the animated series, and I'm like, that's not Superman's father. I don't know who these people are. And once I had that disconnect with the film, my ability to, like, I could appreciate how it was shot, I could appreciate certain directing choices, but character-wise, I had a complete disassociation of who I was being told these people were and who I knew them to be from having experienced watching them. Like, I remember watching the animated Superman series and the first couple episodes are all about the destruction of Krypton. At the end of it, I was sobbing because I was so emotionally, like, ripped from watching myself, from having cared about these characters and knowing they were gonna die, obviously, but like the love they had for each other, the love they had for their son, it just crushed me. And the fact that I wasn't crushed watching it in Man of Steel really told me that this was not a narrative that was spending time to make the characters feel alive. They didn't feel alive to me. They just felt like archetypes. And it's also telling because when I was watching the Crisis crossover, when you get to the part where the Thing is gonna go to Argo City and like Clark, I'm getting like goosebumps thinking about it, like, and Clark and Lois had to put their baby into the thing, I started crying. I was like, oh my god, I can't believe this is gonna happen, like, as if I was Kryptonian, like, as if like, it can't happen again, they can't do this to their baby. I was so emotionally wretched because I know Clark and I know Lois and I know these characters, and I couldn't imagine what it was like to watch, to like watch history repeat itself that way. And then, you know, Clark and Kara have this dialogue together talking about what their survival has meant to the legacy of Krypton, and I was like crying because I understood what they meant and I understood what they were saying, and it felt like the perfect understanding of what all of these characters have meant, what all of these characters have done, like, and I was like, this is why I watched this show. Because it knows Superman, it knows the super family, it understands the value of that world and those characters and what they represent, and it does so perfectly, even when it's flawed. And that's what I want from the DCEU, that they don't give me. In comparison with the MCU, a lot of these characters, like I said, when I was growing up and I was reading Marvel comics, I mostly read X-Men. I knew Daredevil because he was a Spider-Man person. I read Spider-Man. I knew Captain America. He wasn't like my super favorite, but I enjoyed his stuff. I enjoyed Fantastic Four. I liked a little bit because I like their stories. Because I like Dr. Doom. I like him. He's a flex. So I knew a lot of the characters. I had a couple who were my favorites. Like, I remember I knew about who Enchantress was because my first comic I ever got was a Dazzler comic, and one of the people that Dazzler fights is Enchantress, so I knew who Enchantress was before I even knew who Thor was. And so like when I watch an X-Men movie, I come into it with those feelings. That's why, you know, Dark Phoenix is a piece of shit, because like there is absolutely no emotional investment that you feel because they haven't invested in these characters. So like I see and I sense the disconnect when I watch like an X-Men movie. I feel like this isn't these characters, they're not doing it the right way, and I can actively feel and see what's missing from the narrative. Like Iron Man 3, for example, I know a lot of people don't like that film. It's very contentious because of the Mandarin and all these kind of other aspects of it. But like when I was watching when I was watching Iron Man 3, because I didn't have all of that context, all I was really seeing was like Tony Stark's character arc that had been going on since the beginning of this franchise. And so my continuity in a lot of ways for the MCU is what they have given me. So when Tony Stark dies in Endgame and he's like, I am Iron Man, and he snaps his fingers, I'm not emotional because of the comics, because I have an attachment to Tony Stark, the comic book character. I'm attached to Robert Downey Jr., the actor who made his big comeback from playing this character, and how they have really thoroughly developed him to be a person who was, you know, an imperialist, capitalist piece of shit, who Steve said in Avengers was never the one to sacrifice himself, to lay himself down on the line, to now in Endgame being that person. And so that's the continuity in which I cared for Tony Stark. It had nothing to do with the comics. It had nothing to do with me being a fan of him outside of the MCU. It had to be with who the MCU made Tony to me. That's the same way I feel about Steve. Because like, and also I have to say, like, it's a combination of him and Chris Evans, because Steve is inconsistently written. He does kind of waffle a lot in terms of who his values are and what's put in it. Because like, his ending is trash because he should have grown. And it's just a sharp regression that you wonder if Steve was getting character development or he was just responding to what Bucky's situation was putting him into. You know what I mean? Like, those are the kind of things that I would get into with people. And I remember just when I was watching Endgame and the scene with the On Your Left scene, like, I was like, it's lit, you know? It was fun because of how they built these characters. But I don't love all these characters from a comic perspective. And that's what I mean by that bias. That's what I mean by why I don't own all the movies. Also, I was waiting for the box set. In general, I never felt a need to have to revisit those films because I wasn't revisiting characters that I loved from my childhood. They were just fun characters. Like even Black Panther, which I saw 3 times, I think it's almost the most perfect movie. It's the most feminist MCU movie. I love it, period. However, T'Challa has never been a character that I liked, because I knew T'Challa through his marriage to Storm, and that's not the best introduction to T'Challa. He was never my boy. So like when I said that like I don't like love T'Challa, it's because like that was never a character that meant that to me. That's what Storm was, that's what Static was, that's what Black Lightning is. Like those are characters that I grew up watching and knowing and caring about, not T'Challa. Like the cultural and historical element, of course I get all of that, but as a fan of that, and I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that, it's still an amazing movie, it still shits on all these other hoes, but I can also say I'm not a fan of that property. Not every comic book fan needs to be a fan of every single part of comics. Like, I love comics. I love graphic novels. And I also love comic book history. I love reading about comic book history. I love the cultural history of comics, especially when you think about it as like an immigrant Jewish medium and New York based and all those kind of things. I love that. However, it doesn't mean I need to like and care and be invested in every single comic book character. Like, that's why the internet is there. I do my research, I read, I think about things, but like I don't need to love every single character to be a comic book fan. I need to know what I'm talking about, I need to be informed, but I can also be wrong. Like, I don't know everything about Black Mask. I only really know him from a few products. So like when people tell me like, oh, he's supposed to be like this, I'm like, alright, cool, you're right. I'm not gonna be like arguing about it. Like, that's just not the point of that. Is not for me, you know. That's not what I go into this thing for. That's not what I want to do. And I just feel like we also need to just also recognize that like Marvel's place in the movie industry is fucked. It's fucked. It's fucked on multiple levels, and we allow that to happen because we keep making it seem as though the fact that it's mainstream comics means that it's just like passive. Like, they have so much money now that they affect the way the entire market runs, the way budgets are being set up, and that is not a good thing. And I think it's important that, like, whether or not we're fans or we're biased against one side or the other, that we understand that these movies are shaping the way that our pulp culture exists. That is especially daunting when one is owned by a studio that is afraid of actually putting queer characters in their stories and having them be major roles because they want them to be edited out when they send them to other places. We drag DC when they deserve it, and they have deserved it for a long time. But Marvel has been able to skirt over its incompetencies, its character inconsistencies, its problematic behavior. Like, it literally, in its Endgame Infinity War thing, killed 2 women for the sake of 2 men's plot stories back to back, and then gave us like a girl power moment in both movies. Like, we have to enjoy these films with our eyes open. Like, DC has been trashed for a long time because it had the wrong creator, in my opinion, helming the seat. Marvel has had great creators helming the seat, yet they are still so behind the times in where they need to be. The DC universe in general, if you include like the movies, the television show, and everything like that, is ahead in every single way than Marvel is. Period. Like, it has definitely struggled to do anything that DC has already been doing. There are no characters of color in the Avengers movie that matter besides Nick Fury. And he's like, you know, he's the black boss. So he's like there, but he's like to the left, you know. I know that's the right to me, but like, whatever. At least with Justice League, you had 2 men of color having prominent roles in that film, where you had none in the Avengers film. And the Avengers film, to me, also just like gags me, because like I really am still disgusted at the way that like the Wasp got treated in this franchise. Because I do know stuff about the Avengers. They're just not a favorite brand of mine. So like when the Ultron stuff happened, like the moment that, I think this is part of my big thing with Marvel as well, and why I'm glad I'm not invested in them that much character-wise, is because the moment that they made Tony Stark and the Bruce Banner responsible for creating Ultron, I was like, oh, okay. Like, that was the moment where I felt the limitations of the world that they had created. Like, I think there are so many choices that they've made because they're trying to, like, you know, homogenize and build their brand that were just so not great. Like, everything with Scarlet Witch, like bringing in the twins, the Maximoff twins, when you couldn't have X-Men and you couldn't have any of that stuff, trash. And they weren't even Romani, like I was like, trash, can't do this. Like, there are so many missteps in Marvel's portfolio that kind of get so many dull movies, so many boring movies, so many character inconsistencies that we don't talk about because overall they are competently made, they have a structure that works, and so they were allowed to have middling movies for like a big chunk of their run. And DC, because it came up during while Marvel was really excelling, never got a chance to find its footing. And so I do feel frustration that now that DC is starting to find their footing, that they are being held to a standard that is really warped and based on like an extra 5 years of another studio getting to like test the waters and build their brand. Like DC rushed, but DC is also being rushed. And at least when they are asked to be rushed, they're responding with actually making, you know, interesting movie choices. Not all of them that I agree with, but like they are trying, you know, Watchmen as part of the DCU. My final thoughts, because I'm starting to ramble, I'm trying to make this not as long. To be a good critic, in my opinion, is to know what your biases are, to address them, and to question them when it comes to you criticizing something. I have my biases, but I also know what they are, and I try my best to explain what they are and deconstruct them. Like, I have never disliked a Marvel movie because of DC. That's ridiculous. Am I resentful of the fact that Marvel is able to just print money and like people will see a middling Marvel movie and maybe be, you know, anxious to see a actual good DC movie? Yes. That does not make the movie's quality change. It's just an observation. As Marvel is now going on to their 4th phase and the multiverse, and they have all of this power, it is going to be extra important that we don't just give them money because they have been telling us that they deserve to have our money. And I think it's going to be very important that we hold Marvel to the criteria that we hold literally every other film series. Literally every other thing. Like, unless it's Fast and the Furious, which has totally given up on any logic and that's why we love them, like, Marvel deserves to be criticized more. And I love them. And I will say for a long time, I was on the other side. You guys know me. Like, I've gone back and forth about do I like Marvel or DC more, because for a long time, DC was just straight up losing, and you don't want to be in the losing team. The DC characters are iconic to me. They are the ones that I love the most, even if their movies have been middling. Doesn't mean that their movies are good. It just means that, like, I love them more. And with the Marvel characters, it's like, I don't love them all, but they've had great movies. That's it. Anyway, I hope you guys have a good time. I hope you enjoyed this rambly video. My weird, loosey-goosey thoughts. If you want to see more of this, please like and subscribe. Start a conversation down below, because, you know, even if you didn't like the entire thing or didn't agree with me, you can still talk to me. We can still talk about it. You know, I'm very fair in the comments, I will say. Like, I'm very nice to y'all, so you shouldn't be scared of me. I only, you know, X you out if you're racist or homophobic, because I don't fuck with that. So, see you soon.